welcome to the Something Better podcast. I'm Joe Conroy, the Public Information Officer for the City of Bakersfield, and today I am joined by Mercedes Mayers. Is that right? Mayers?
Yes, that
Mayers,
is correct.
and Lieutenant Matthew Gregory with the Police Department. And we're here to talk about a really important project that we've been working on for a few years now. It's part of the CalVIP, or it's received CalVIP money, which is California Violence Intervention and Prevention Program. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
All right, awesome. And you guys have seen some really good results from this program so far. Before we get too far into that stuff, tell me a little bit, what is CalVIP and what is it you guys have been working on for the last few years? And either one of you want to jump in on that one.
Yeah, I could go ahead and get started. So the City of Bakersfield was awarded the grant, the California Violence Intervention and Prevention, and the whole goal and mission of the grant is really to intervene, prevent, and reduce gun violence. And in doing so, the city collaborates with our local police department as well as community-based organizations.
And how does that work? What does that mean?
So at any time someone is at the highest risk of being victimized or perpetrating gun and or gang violence, the BPD, they identify the individual, but versus them constantly arresting the individual, they'll pass it on to the city. And what we do is we collaborate with our community-based organization, and we come up with a strategic plan on how to intervene, on how to provide them community resources, on basically how can we get them from wanting to commit another act of violence, whether it be education, housing, employment, or just addressing some of their basic needs.
And so you're talking directly to these individuals who are either prone to being a victim of some sort of violence or somebody that's going to commit an act of violence.
Yes, that is correct. And so BPD, they are the ones who really do the identifying. They'll provide us. I think what I really like is that they provide us as much information as possible that we can pass on to our staff, because we have to understand that these individuals are at the highest risk, as mentioned, of either being victimized or perpetrating gun violence. So we have to ensure that we are providing as much information to our staff to ensure their safety as well as the individual that they're interacting with too.
Okay. Lieutenant, can you talk a little bit about how you guys identify somebody on either end of that spectrum?
Right. So, excuse me, historically, your police department has always known who was going to be the most at risk, or the most at risk of either being a victim or being, a perpetrator of violence. And so, but the problem is we never really knew what to do with that information. And so, we talk to people all day. Most of our job is really just talking to folks, really to talk about policing. And so, we could tell you, hey, so-and-so is, not doing what they should be doing. They're really exposing themselves to being a victim or being a perpetrator. But how could we really get ahead of that, right? Because we want to prevent these things from happening. We're very good at going in after the fact and trying to figure out what happened and who did, who, what, where, and why, but we want to prevent it from going on. So that's where Mercedes and her team comes through. So we have a few different ways that we figure out who's going to be the most at risk, either or. Various different intelligence methods that we gather, and just through talking to folks, and just our teams going out and responding to these calls for service and being proactive in their policing. And then I take that information, I compile it into a way that makes sense, and then I give that to Mercedes and her team, and I'll say, hey, like, these 2 or 3 individuals are very specific. 2 or 3 individuals really need, we think they would really benefit for some help, whether they need a job. I mean, sometimes they just need a driver's license or a social security card. It's very basic stuff. But we think if we're able to get them onboarded with some type of support services, that we can prevent them from being a victim or a suspect. And it was a little difficult at first, just trying to figure out how that handshake was going to go, from one way or the other. But now we're to the point where if something happens over the course of a weekend, I'll text Mercedes, hey, we had an incident over here. Can somebody reach out to this individual or what have you? And so it's very live now. And so in that communication, it really is. I mean, it's a one-way street for us. I mean, we're telling Mercedes and her team, hey, these are the folks that we really want to help out, want to get to. And they take it from there, and they go and do the phenomenal work that they do every day. And so we're seeing really, really good results over time.
Okay. Awesome. So Mercedes, you're the Outreach Program Supervisor, is that right?
That is correct.
And what does that mean? What do you do?
So I supervise our contracted community-based organization. So my job is just to ensure that anyone who is being transferred over to the city, as I give them to our staff, my job is to ensure that they're constantly following up. My job is to ultimately provide them the training that they need, making sure that they're making their touch points, their home visits, getting them their vital documents. And at any time there's, let's just say, something that they don't have a contact, they don't have a resource, that's where I kind of come in. My part is to also be in the community. So I go to different community events that are held in the community, obtain those resources, bring those resources to our staff. I coordinate all of our coordination meetings. And then every Thursday I bring in a resource, whether it be employment, education, or someone who can provide a direct service to our participants. So my job is just to ensure to provide those needs and those skills and those trainings to our staff so that they can go out into the community. Because we have to understand that some of these individuals, they're very familiar with the type of work, but some of them might be fresh out of incarceration, maybe a year or 2 years. So we have to provide them those trainings on how to make those home visits, on how to make those interactions with these individuals in person, the language to use and what not to use.
Oh, okay. So what I'm hearing a lot is there's a lot of relationship building here with this.
Yes.
Both from you guys to the community-based organizations and then also with the specific individuals that you might be contacting. So can you talk a little bit about that relationship side of things? Like how do you create that and how do you foster that?
Well, I'll speak to the internal piece, and then we can talk about our CBOs and going outward. But it was a little different at first, right? I mean, we're as policing, we're just naturally we kind of hoard our information, and for a long time it was kind of this oxymoron where we're frustrated with the state of things, but we didn't know either where to go, and we were a little concerned about going there, right? We're very just my profession generally is adverse to change generally. And so when we finally took a hard look at ourselves and how we were doing business, how we were serving our community, and we said, there's got to be a better way. We're just not doing as well as we can. And a lot of those underlying factors that led to violence were things that were outside of our control. And so we said, hey, there's this way that we can approach it, and Mercedes can kind of take it, but let's give this a shot. Let's really work with these folks, really build that relationship. And what I mean is, hey, how do we interact with each other day to day, right? What do we say to each other? What can I say? What are we going to tell them? And then over time, we were able to kind of massage some of those friction points over to now it's very smooth, it's very linear, it's very predictable, and it works. I can inform Mercedes and her team of this is the trend that we're seeing right now. What can you guys do to help us out? And then what can we do to help you guys out on the enforcement side, right? Because it's a back and forth, right? They have their strengths, we have our strengths, and you put them together, and it's an impressive thing to see. And so now we're to the point now where my teams, so I manage 2 special enforcement teams. So historically they were known as the gang unit, and I also manage our violent criminal apprehension team. So the people that are the most violent offenders in our community, those are the teams that go after them. Really the kind of the scariest people that you can imagine, those the folks that are tasked with kind of addressing that issue. And so, I now relay to my team, and my team, it's been a couple of years now, so they're really bought into this program, but we've really refocused on how we approach enforcement. I mean, historically, you would, 20 years ago, it would be kind of a dragnet approach. And we found that was, one, it was ineffective, and 2, we really created more problems than we were there to solve. And it was well intended. I think the hearts were there. We were just kind of naive to some other options that were out there. And so now with the data-informed, evidence-based targeted approaches that we use today, and that information sharing and working with our CBOs, we're seeing drastic improvements, while at the same time we're seeing very, massive improvements on the relationship with our community members.
Okay. Mercedes, can you talk about some of those CBOs, who you guys are working with, and what each maybe brings to the table? You don't have to go into super depth on that stuff, but maybe kind of some examples.
Yeah, so we have, for example, we have the Wendell Davis Foundation. They are really great inside of our juvenile facilities. They're in there weekly interacting with both those individuals, whether it be in Apex, Crossroads, or Juvenile Hall. And we know at one point a lot of those individuals are going to become released. So they're making that connection on the inside. And as they come out, depending on the individual and their needs, we pass them on to, if it's could be Stay Focused Ministries. They're great at community outreaching and really going into the community and interacting with them and providing different forms of outreaches and building skills with the community. And then we even have someone like Garden Pathways. Garden Pathways is anywhere from, they deal a lot with our adult population, tattoo removal, intensive case management, really addressing their needs from employment. And then we have CAP-K. CAP-K focuses on our basic needs. They've assisted a lot in just relocating a lot of our high-risk individuals who want to get out of a certain lifestyle but maybe don't have the financial means. And then Compassion Christian Center has a lot of our peacekeepers, and our peacekeepers are your boots on the ground. They're the ones that are going to do the rumor control. They're the ones that are really going to de-escalate conflict resolution. And so a lot of our CBOs, they are truly boots on the ground. They're minimizing rumors. They're preventing retaliation. Sometimes when there's a shooting that occurs or even a homicide, our team is very good at just immediately going to the streets and saying, hey, what is the street saying? How can we prevent anything else from occurring or from another shooting or another homicide? And so they're really good in just ensuring that they know the community and kind of they have their ears to the ground. So we really value their work.
That's interesting. So one of the things you mentioned there was tattoo removal and getting somebody out of the life, breaking that cycle. We talk about the cycle of violence in lots of communities, not just here, but in a lot of communities. And those are some of the things that you don't necessarily think about. I don't think I would have thought of that. So that's very interesting. This program, obviously, it's funded by a grant from the state.
Yes.
We've seen this program in other places, correct? And we've seen results in those places. That's why we decided to bring this here.
Yes, that is. So for the longest time, Central Valley didn't really have the grant. You saw it up north, whether it be in Stockton, Oakland, or even down south in LA. So this we've seen within the last 2 years that our Central Valley really getting noticed. You have us, you have Delano. And so I think that was one of the biggest things is that every year before we saw a lot of reductions, you saw Kern County being the highest in homicides or the number one, killing county. And so the Central Valley just wasn't provided those grants. So then as people started applying, more community-based started applying, you start see a collaboration, you start seeing numbers going down. And so I think that's really important to notice that the Central Valley they're getting a lot of notice for a lot of the reductions that's going around.
So kind of leading into that, a couple of exciting announcements. Recently we've announced that you guys are now an official office, the Office of Violence Intervention and Prevention here for Bakersfield. You guys were kind of nomads for a little bit, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. So now it's kind of nice to have a home, right?
Yep,
Yes.
absolutely.
That's pretty cool. So very exciting. Congratulations to you guys on that. Lieutenant, I don't know if you want to refer to some of the, we recently have also announced the statistics that we saw from 2024. Sounds like some good news there.
Yep. We saw significant decreases kind of really across the board. But one thing that I like to highlight that for folks that don't really see behind the scenes when it comes to your police department, we saw a pretty big spike in homicides. I was one of the homicide unit supervisors back in like 2021, 2020.
Yeah.
And, we have a finite number of homicide detectives, and so those folks were really burning the candle at both ends and just, working, kind of constantly. It was really heartbreaking on both sides of the fence. And now with a decrease in the amount of shootings and homicides, those detectives now can work other cases. So like your robberies, your carjackings, things like that would have ordinarily, because of the homicide, would have really been put on the back burner a little bit, are now really being, first time they get that thing, they're grabbing it and they're working that thing. And so we're really seeing that trickle-down effect of where the improvements kind of...
makes you more efficient.
Vastly more efficient. And not to say that, it was just homicides they're homicides and they're just so important and they're so vital and they're so
Take
complex
up a lot of resources.
It's really difficult. And And so now we're really tackling those lower level crimes. And so, as this matures and as we grow this, that only, becomes an exponential factor that goes into that. And one thing I wanted to point out that Mercedes kind of touched on when we talk about some of the CBOs and the work that they do. We had a gentleman who had just come out of prison not too long ago. He was from one of our local gangs, and he had a history of being a very violent individual, very influential in the gang. And we knew when he came out, he was going to. There could be issues there. I mean, he knows folks. And so we said, hey, how can we get ahead of this? And so we actually sat down with him, with a parole officer, and had a meeting with him and said, hey, what can we do to help you out? What can we do to prevent you from going back down this road again? And give me a job. Help me find a way to get a job. And it's difficult for these guys. I mean, they come out of prison, they're felons. I mean, they have a rap sheet. It's really hard, and it's really debilitating for them. But working with him specifically, and this is just one example of many, but working with him, getting him the certificates that he needed, getting him enrolled in the classes that he needed. He did all the work. He did all the schooling. He got all the certificates that he needed. And now he's off and doing, working, and haven't heard a peep out of him. And that may not. That I would bet you that would not have been the case had it not been for the work that they did here.
That's awesome. Yeah. I think Christian Clegg, our city manager, he's mentioned it before, and I'm sure this is repeated through you guys as well. But it's a very small percentage of the residents that are responsible for a very large percent of the crime in our city, and probably in the same case in other cities. Talk a little bit about that. What is that percentage? Do you know off the top of your head?
Well, I'll let Mercedes speak specifics, but just in general, we've always known, and through policing, that it's always a small group of folks that are going to cause the most violence. But again, we would do our best to kind of get at that, but we couldn't really help the underlying effects. And so when we started to really look at the data, that just reinforced the belief that we held just based on seeing things, that this is in fact the case. And so that may be less than 2% of the population that's driving 50% of the violence.
Yeah.
And so if we can get at that 2%, whatever that looks like, if that means getting this guy a job, or getting her linked up to like housing, or some kind of other services, and finding them a more positive path for their life, that really starts to shrink that number down. And so we see really exponential effects moving forward. So.
Yeah, no, and when you talk about it's a small number of residents, you're talking about generations and generations of incarceration. There's individuals, youth, that BPD has come across, and then the conversation is I've arrested their dad, I've arrested their grandpa. So these are just really trying to find ways to engage in these individuals. What is it that we can provide them? Because if it's a generation, if your grandpa was incarcerated, if your dad was incarcerated, if your mom's incarcerated, and you as a youth have been incarcerated or in that lifestyle, then you ultimately have to understand that you have to provide them something that they can literally just want to walk away and say, hey, this is not for me. It's a job, but you're talking about how can you economically sustain them for the rest, whether it be how is this job going to benefit them versus if they would continue in the lives. So a lot of the things that we've seen, especially with a lot of our CBOs who sit at their table, they know their mom, their dads, their grandmas, their grandpa, because it's generational.
Yeah, and at that level, when you're talking about youth, I mean, that's especially if you've generationally interacted with these folks before. You're talking about building a level of trust too. Yeah. That hey, we're on your side. We're trying to help and find a way to help them. Yeah. And so it's very exciting to see that these numbers are coming down. Is that accurate?
Yes,
oh, absolutely.
That is accurate.
Yeah.
What have we seen so far? What have we seen for 2024 versus the years prior?
So we're still seeing the measurable decreases in the shootings kind of across the board. Homicides, it's going to take, I'd like to do a little bit more of a longer time frame, like 3 months, maybe quarterly, to really get a good gauge. But so far we're looking good for this year. I mean, we're early on. I don't want to jinx anything. I don't want to knock on wood here, but it's only February. But I mean, things are looking good. But the underlying message of all this is, and what I want people to know, is we are really building out those foundational systems in place. It was really hard. It took a lot of work. Yeah. It took a lot of reaching across the table. But now that these things are built out, and we're growing that capacity, We're not looking back anymore. We're moving forward, moving the needle forward. And so now we're not only just looking about, okay, how do we tackle the problems that we're seeing today, but what are we going to do about the problems that we see tomorrow, next year, 5 years from now?
Mm-hmm.
What does OVIP look like in that time frame? And what kind of capacity and capability can we build out to better serve those that are the most at risk? And therefore, by serving them, you're serving the greater good for everybody else around them. If we can stop. A lot of people ask me, "Well, what's your ultimate goal?" I said, "My ultimate goal is, no homicides and no shootings, right?" But it's going to take a lot of work, and it has. But we've seen really good, substantial, movement here. And I'm a true believer, and I'll tell anybody that'll listen that this is where it's at. It's all about partnerships. One leg of the table can't make it stand up. It takes a couple legs, and that's where we're at.
Yeah, and I think the numbers speak for themselves. Data rules the world, but 2024, we ended with 3 group-related homicide compared to some of the other years where it was 5 or 7. Our non-fatal shooting was down by 40%, and so that alone just really speaks to the work and the volume that not only BPD, but as well as our community-based organization and all of our staff out there who are constantly out there day in and day and night, just really interacting with the community, ensuring that they're preventing any kind of shooting or homicide. So
that's awesome. Well, thank you guys for being here and talking about this program and the impact you guys are having on the community. I think people may be seeing the results and not even necessarily realize it or realizing the work that goes in behind it. So thank you guys for being here, Mercedes and Lieutenant Gregory. Thank you very much. And thank you, of course, for listening. If you've been listening to the Something Better podcast, and if you like what you're hearing, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, follow us on your favorite subscription service, and we'll catch you in the next one. Again, I am Joe Conroy with the Something Better podcast.